Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the velvet drapes on something more frightening than gothic horror tales, the destiny of the unwed woman in Victorian England. Skip the vampires, skip Jack the Ripper. The true terror was remaining unmarried beyond 25 with a dowry tinier than your nephew's fingernail and zero matrimonial possibilities. You weren't simply unwed, you were cursed. But before we discover whether you wind up wandering the countryside, reciting verse to sheep, or working as your relative's unpaid companion until you slowly dissolve into the furniture, please hit that like button and subscribe. Only if you genuinely appreciate this kind of beautifully tragic plunge into historical obscurity, and drop a comment telling me your location and your relationship status, rated from desperately hoping for an engagement to completely ready to wed your pet for insurance purposes. Now lower those lights, turn on that fan for some gentle madhouse atmosphere, and get comfortable. Let's stop briefly and consider the genuine questions that troubled unmarried ladies after sundown. How did you occupy entire days without a spouse and no voting rights? Was needlework simply disguised competitive self-torture? How many felines could you reasonably shelter before authorities intervened? Were you secretly dreaded or merely pitied so intensely it counted as psychological abuse? Did spinsters have a covert greeting? Most crucially, if your sole romantic prospect is Cousin Reginald, do you surrender to destiny or begin a clandestine, passionate romance under a fictitious Italian pseudonym? Congratulations, you've just awakened in 1863. Your name is likely Margaret. You possess 2 head coverings and a perilous amount of unrealized capability. Everyone worries slightly about your extensive reading habits. Best of luck. Sunlight filters through gathered fabric onto a chamber containing more lace than optimism. You wake to the soft impact of your personal despair and perhaps a distant chime from the neighborhood Episcopal church. No spouse, no screaming infants, simply you, a lukewarm cup of yesterday's brew, and the crushing liberty to remain horizontal until morning meal grows frigid once more. But dawn cannot be ignored eternally, even in quarters that appear decorated solely by your grandmother's sewing circle. The wall covering shows flowers, the atmosphere carries hints of lavender pouches and silent dejection. Your footwear, well, one has vanished again. It rests somewhere between your worn copy of Pride and Prejudice and the expanding collection of perfectly pressed linens you'll never utilize. Unless you consider occasional discreet sobbing over lost romantic chances. You extend across the mattress, digits flexing against cotton bedding rigid with starch and propriety. The dwelling stays quiet except for the muted sounds of morning meal preparation by another person elsewhere, likely your wedded sister or a patient domestic worker. There's an instant when you contemplate turning over and returning to slumber, but then you recall Victorian unwed women might be overlooked, but they're never permitted to be lazy. That's what the neighbourhood gossips exist for, discovering you lounging. The initial significant choice of the morning approaches. Do you arise and risk encountering your mother, who will certainly question your nighttime visions? Did you dream of anyone suitable? Or do you stay flat and develop a rich imagination filled with romantic tales and dessert-related remorse? Regardless, you understand you must confront the looking glass eventually. You prepare for the reflection, one somewhat flattened portion of hair, a lace sleeping cap positioned at a dubious angle, and an expression declaring, "I hold views about women's ownership laws." The following step involves slipping into your morning robe, a garment specifically crafted to let a lady appear respectable before 11 without acknowledging complete surrender. The material is durable, the shade is defeated tan. The belt has witnessed superior eras. You proceed to the washing basin where a water jug bravely pretends cleanliness and a soap bar is worn to the thickness of your remaining optimism for a sudden marriage proposal. A swift splash across the face, freezing, revitalizing, and a gentle reminder that this residence doesn't believe in the luxury of heated water. No bubble bath, no vegetable eye treatment, and definitely no bathing melodies. This is the Victorian period. Cleanliness is functional and happiness is suspect. If you desire to feel elegant, you might apply some floral water behind your ears and hope it neutralizes the existential aroma. The chamber is a gallery of carefully developed pastimes, volumes piled on every surface, partially completed embroidery hanging over the chair, a container of knitting resembling more a woolen disaster than useful clothing. You observe the Italian verse collection on your bedside table. Shocking. You read it regardless, concealed within gardening manual pages, just if anyone enters unexpectedly. The sole genuine observer is your cat, who spent the night curled at your feet and now acknowledges you with the expression of one who knows your secrets and finds them somewhat disappointing. As you prepare to meet the day, you permit yourself a small rebellious moment. You crack the window to admit morning air, unfiltered and filled with the faint aroma of coal smoke and distant pastries. The road outside awakens, merchants, dairy carts, the clatter of hooves and the daily parade of other people's children toward instruction. You experience a pang of something, regret, relief. It's difficult to determine before the first cup of fresh tea. By the time you finally rise, you're prepared for the approaching day. No husband to concern yourself with, no small fingers pulling at your nightgown, just the gentle certainty that your day will be exactly as peaceful or interesting as you create it. And as you slip into your practical slippers and prepare to face the household, you whisper silent gratitude for the undisturbed morning. The mountain of lace and the freedom to select your own escapades, even if today's grand adventure is merely reorganizing the sewing box again. You enter the corridor, single and magnificently undervalued, ready to commence another perfectly typical Victorian day. Let's discuss the dangerous solo expedition into Victorian clothing. With no servant to secure your stays and no companion to rescue you when you inevitably become trapped in your own undergarments. Each morning tests your agility, creativity and physical strength. Extra credit if you don't faint by midday. First, let's establish the scene. You in your frigid bedchamber, surrounded by an intimidating pile of undergarments, outer garments, puzzling intermediate layers, and the distant echoing amusement of married ladies who employ a personal maid for this task. You stare into the depths of your wardrobe, knowing that what separates you from morning meal isn't lack of determination, but a marathon of fabric and fastenings so intricate it could confuse an architect. Step 1. The undershift. It's the simplest part. Pull it over your head. Try not to consider that you'll perspire completely through it by noon and continue. Next, underskirt number 1. Perhaps 2 if it's chilly. 3 if you're feeling hopeful about your day's breathing capacity. Each layer adds volume, warmth, and a faint, increasing sense of panic. You begin to comprehend why Victorian homes contained so many fainting furniture pieces. Then, the primary challenge. The stays. The stays are less clothing and more an examination of personal determination and hand-eye coordination. Without a lady's maid to lace you properly, it's you against a maze of grommets, cords and physics. You do what every single Victorian lady must. You inhale deeply, twist your arms backward at an angle never endorsed by health professionals, and begin tugging. If you're fortunate, the laces slide through smoothly. If you're like everyone else, they knot, twist and mock you. You wedge a wooden utensil between your back and the bedpost for additional leverage, an ancient technique inherited through generations of determined, slightly oxygen-deprived women. Stays secured, you pause momentarily. Are you still drawing breath? It's uncertain. Your ribs feel strangely ornamental. Your waist now serves the department of compressed vital organs. And you remind yourself this is the cost of social acceptance. If you drop anything. Now, you face the genuine Victorian challenge, the dignified crouch and recovery technique. It is never dignified. Now, it's time for the layers. Blouse, overskirt, underskirt, perhaps padding. If you want your silhouette to announce, I'm definitely not concealing treats back here. Every fastener is a moral test. Every hook and eye is an existential inquiry. You realise, as you struggle with the 9th tiny button on your collar, that Victorian fashion was created by someone who never had to dress independently. Maybe this explains why so many portraits show women appearing mildly infuriated. Then there are the accessories, a humble pin, gloves for indoors, because nothing suggests casual breakfast like being prepared for a royal audience, and a hat secured with a pin that serves as both decorative and dangerous. Don't forget stockings fastened with garters that will spend the day either sliding down your legs or biting into your skin like an angry rodent. Shoes if you can bend sufficiently to reach them, and your ensemble is nearly finished. Somewhere during this process you are guaranteed to experience a minor breakdown. An underskirt twisted, a stay string hopelessly tangled, a sleeve caught on a door handle as you attempt a dramatic departure. There is no one to assist. It's you, the mirror, and the dawning realization that by the time you finish, it might actually be time to undress again for bed. And yet, despite the daily performance, there's a strange satisfaction in mastering your own layers. Each clasp, pin and button is a small triumph. You emerge from your bedchamber slightly winded, posture perfectly straight, looking every inch the proper Victorian lady. If only your cat knew the price you paid in blood circulation. As you finally descend to breakfast, you do so victoriously. You, and only you, have survived the gauntlet of solo dressing. The day ahead may hold its own dangers, but at least you know you can face them in 12 layers of starched cotton and tightly bound optimism. Well accomplished, breakfast in the single woman's household is an exercise in quiet endurance. There's no bustling family table, just the soft crunch of slightly hardened bread. Maybe some cold oats and the gentle exhale of resignation as you realise the cat is your most chatty companion. The ceremony begins the moment you descend, creaking along a stairway that echoes back every footfall, as if to remind you that you are the only one in the house with anywhere to go. The dining room is spotless, maintained more from routine than necessity. The silverware is polished, the cloth is starched, and the only thing absent is conversation. Even the timepiece ticks louder. Desperate for some recognition, you settle at your assigned spot, a solitary seat at a table that could easily accommodate 12 if only anyone ever called. Your breakfast awaits, covered with a rounded lid for the element of surprise, although the surprise is always identical: one slice of bread, the aforementioned oats, which can legally be classified as a solid, and tea so weak it's basically hot water with confidence issues. You glance at the cat who jumps onto the nearest chair, giving you an expression that says, "You're fortunate I even appeared for this." If you lived with relatives, there might be the faint sound of movement from another room, perhaps an aunt reading a prayer book, or a cousin writing yet another letter to her suitor in Charleston. If you live alone, your main companions are your own thoughts and a growing awareness of how many teaspoons you own. Breakfast is less a meal, more a meditative condition, punctuated by the faintest hope that maybe today will bring something different. It won't, but hope springs eternal, like weeds and the number of embroidered napkins in your sideboard. You glance out the window. Outside, a world of carriages and delivery boys is just beginning to stir. Inside, time moves more slowly. Every bite of bread is a reminder of how long flour-based products can technically remain edible if you're determined enough and have modest expectations. You mentally make a note to contact the baker, but then remember that contacting the baker is dangerously close to flirting. And in Victorian England, flirting can only end in marriage or scandal, both of which require far too much energy for this hour. Occasionally there's the thrilling adventure of opening a jar of preserves. Victorian preserves are an unpredictable substance, part conserve, part hazard, always threatening to bond itself permanently to the bottom of your spoon. You spread it carefully, not for the flavour but for the colour, a small bright rebellion against a world of beige. There is of course the newspaper, the Herald, folded neatly, by the servant or by you, if you're both master and staff in one, contains all the news fit for digestion shipping arrivals, society, engagements, and the latest advice column. You read them all savouring every accidental error and morsel of scandal, because in a single woman's breakfast routine, the personal column is just as nourishing as the oats. Sometimes a letter arrives, more often it doesn't. When it does, it's usually from a married friend updating you on the latest in child-related disasters or asking, "How are you keeping occupied these days?" As if not married were a full-time occupation. You consider writing back something clever, but you settle for a polite acknowledgement and a well-deployed undercurrent of sarcasm. Even your correspondence is an exercise in Victorian restraint. The cat finally loses interest and wanders off in search of better company. You are left with the last drops of tea and your own thoughts. You toy with the idea of making a second cup, but remember the household budget. One mustn't waste the good tea leaves before the afternoon. Moderation, after all, is a virtue, especially if you want the minister to keep his peace. Breakfast ends as it began, quietly and without ceremony. You collect your plate, stack it in the kitchen, and pause for a moment in the silent cooking area. The day stretches ahead, vast and uncharted, punctuated by more rituals of solitude, small acts of courage, and, if you're lucky, a fresh loaf tomorrow. You scan the newspaper for news, scandal, and, if you're honest, a secret hope that someone else's daughter has failed at courtship even more spectacularly than you. Naturally, the personal column is just there to remind you what you're missing. The day's paper arrives with a thump on the doormat, signalling that somewhere in the world things are happening, probably to other people. You retrieve it, if you're lucky, before the cat uses it as a new sunbathing surface, and settle in at your usual chair, tea in hand and anticipation in your heart. The newsprint is smudgy, the ink faintly scented with disappointment, and the pages crackle ominously as you unfold them. You begin, as always, with the front page. Political intrigue, congressional disputes, some foreign count has scandalised Vienna again, and the price of tea is up. You absorb all this with the calm detachment of a woman whose biggest excitement last week was discovering a forgotten candy in the back of a drawer. You sip your tea, more interested in the weather forecast, which, in true Victorian fashion, is both wildly inaccurate and somehow still manages to shame you for not carrying an umbrella everywhere. Next up, the society pages, where the fate of your reputation hangs in the balance alongside the fortunes of distant cousins you only recognise by their disastrous engagement stories. You scan the names for anyone you know, especially the girls you used to see at cotillions who are now Lady So-and-so or Mrs. Probably Smug. Their triumphs are announced in elegant italics. Their failures, if the editors are feeling generous, are described as taking an extended tour of the continent for her health. You linger over the notices of upcoming balls and charity events, feeling a faint, familiar twinge of FOMO fear of missing out Victorian style. You can practically hear the distant sound of dance cards filling and fans fluttering. Somewhere in a grand candlelit room, someone is waltzing and it's not you. You wonder if they're truly happy or just trapped in an endless sweaty loop with a man who thinks small talk about the price of coal is a seduction technique. Then come the wedding announcements, those cheerful little reminders that someone somewhere is waking up this morning with a new ring and a husband who probably snores. The descriptions are glorious. The bride wore a gown of ivory silk, tastefully adorned with pearls and a look of mild terror. You try not to judge, but you can't help but compare lace trim versus your nightcap, roses versus the questionable state of your daisies, blissful nuptials versus last night's dream about accidentally marrying the minister. If you're feeling brave, you venture into the personal column, that dense thicket of public-private confessions. There, in anonymous ink, are all the troubles you're not supposed to have: lonely in Leicester, seeking companionship; hopeful in Hampshire, seeking advice on stubborn bachelors; and spinster in Suffolk, asking whether it's too late to learn French and escape to Paris. You read their woes, feeling both superior and strangely comforted. At least you're not alone in your solitary melodrama. The advertisements offer a little comic relief. Hair tonics promising to restore the bloom of youth with the subtle side effect of turning your scalp green. Miracle corsets designed by German physicians who have clearly never tried to dress themselves, and a travelling hypnotist who can cure heartbreak. Guaranteed you're tempted mostly by the hypnotist, and only because you imagine the look on your aunt's face when you announce you've been cured of the urge to marry entirely. As you fold the paper, you take stock of your emotional state. A little envy, a dash of schadenfreude, a pinch of hope, and a heaping spoonful of at least my name isn't in the scandal section yet. You set the paper aside, reminded that in the great ledger of Victorian society, being a single woman means never quite knowing if you're winning or simply playing a different game altogether. With the morning news consumed, you glance at the cat who has in fact claimed the society pages as her new resting place and rise to face the day. If nothing else, you have a head full of stories, a list of weddings to avoid, and a renewed determination to someday somehow make the personal column for something truly interesting. The morning's mail brings another wedding announcement, baby photograph, or if you're lucky, a desperate plea from a friend married to a man with the personality of unsalted crackers. You read between the lines and wonder who's truly winning here. It's a daily ritual, this slow walk to the entryway, where a neat pile of correspondence waits to test your emotional resilience. You pause, steadying yourself for the possibilities. A cousin's watercolour of her 7th child, all cheeks and future disappointment. Or perhaps another crisp white envelope announcing the engagement of someone who once swore off men after that unfortunate incident at the Harvest Festival. You run a careful finger under the flap, bracing for news. The first letter is always cheerful, almost suspiciously so. Dearest Margaret, we are simply delighted to announce the birth of little Theodore, who already looks just like his papa, except for the nose. Thank goodness. You set the note aside and silently award yourself a point for every euphemism. So like his father is code, for he's already refusing to eat vegetables, and angelic disposition usually means screams at night like a demon with stomach problems. You turn to the next envelope, recognising the familiar handwriting of your friend Charlotte, now Mrs. Williams, of course, and devoted wife to a man who considers discussing train schedules the pinnacle of marital romance. Her letter is a masterwork of coded misery and competitive homemaking. She writes, "We spent Sunday afternoon playing checkers by the fire. How peaceful it is here." Williams fell asleep after lunch. The fire smoked the entire room, and the only piece moving was the checker I threw at his head. The letters are always full of news. New babies, new houses, new reasons not to envy married life. There are stories of dinner parties which seem glamorous until you notice the careful mention of beef roast for a change, which suggests that the household budget is tighter than Charlotte's stays. Or perhaps the ominous line, "We had such a lovely time with the neighbours." Even dear Mrs. Peterson joined in, which almost certainly means someone had a bit too much wine and had to be politely escorted home in a wheelbarrow. Sometimes you receive a letter that reads more like a cry for help. "I do so envy your freedom, Margaret. Imagine being able to read in the afternoon, undisturbed. You look up from the page at your own quiet room, sunlight falling gently across the rug, and consider the cost of this peace, the constant background noise of societal judgment, the unending game of avoiding matchmakers, and a library that, while peaceful, echoes a bit too much some days. Not all letters are subtle. There are the aggressively congratulatory ones, often from older relatives. "I hear you have taken up painting, my dear, so wholesome. No doubt your landscapes will bloom as beautifully as your character, which is so independent." You mentally file independent with all the other code words, self-sufficient, capable, and not even remotely a marital prospect. The most treasured letters, though, are the honest ones, the ones from friends who confide their secret hopes and mishaps, who admit that marriage is not the fairy tale ending, but simply a different kind of story. One friend writes, "If I have to listen to my husband explain farming techniques one more time, I shall throw myself into the vegetable garden. Write soon, send gossip." Another ends with, "I miss our walks. Let's never grow up. Or at least not too much." You fold the letters, tie them with a ribbon, and tuck them in a drawer alongside old programs from dances and half-written poems. There's comfort in these exchanges, proof that you're not alone in your uncertainties, your laughter, your longing for something slightly more poetic than another recipe for boiled beef. As you finish the last letter, you reach for pen and paper, thinking carefully about your reply. Will you offer sympathy, witty stories, or simply reassure your friend that despite everything you're doing quite well? Thank you. And you hope her next baby looks nothing like her husband's father. And as the ink dries, you realise that whether life is single or married, everyone's just doing their best. And sometimes that's worth more than any congratulatory card. If you're not living alone, you're sharing breakfast with an aunt who asks any news every single day. Spoiler, she means marriage proposals, jam, passive aggression, and toast crumbs. Just another typical family morning. The morning sun creeps into the dining room, glancing off the fine china, reserved apparently for all occasions involving familial discomfort. You take your seat, careful not to claim the spot nearest the window, which is forever reserved for Aunt Cordelia. She arrives precisely on time, shawl draped and spectacles at the ready, looking for all the world like she's about to audit your life. You know the routine pleasantries first, then the daily interrogation. There is a brief, hopeful pause as you butter your toast. Never too thick, or she'll comment on extravagance. You brace yourself. The first bite of porridge hasn't even cooled before Aunt Cordelia strikes, voice as sweet as the jam she spoons onto her toast with surgical precision. "Any news, dear?" she asks, making direct eye contact over her glasses. You consider replying with a wild story about running off with the postman, but sense that Victorian irony might be wasted before tea. The conversation is a ballet of careful evasions. You mention the weather, unusually fine for April, the garden. The daisies are nearly out, which must mean rain, and if desperate, the cat. She seems to be enjoying her independence. None of it works. The question hangs in the air, as sticky as the jam, waiting for the real answer. Have you been proposed to yet? Or at the very least, have you smiled suggestively at a man of suitable prospects? Every family has an Aunt Cordelia, part Greek chorus, part marriage market analyst, and part spiritual barometer for your suitability as a niece. She dispenses advice with the certainty of someone who's never had to live with the consequences. You know, your cousin Emma found a lovely suitor at the church social, and she wasn't even trying, she offers, as if your entire romantic destiny can be solved by standing near hymn books at the correct time. You chew slowly, biding time as your aunt's commentary moves on to the important business of judging everyone else in town. Mrs. Henderson's daughter is altogether too forward with the minister, and poor Miss Sarah Wells is terribly clever. But that's no help at all. If there's any comfort, it's that you're not the only one under the magnifying glass. You nod sympathetically, wondering if Miss Sarah Wells is secretly living her best life with a forbidden volume of French poetry. The table is a battlefield, you, armed with your politeness, and Aunt Cordelia wielding questions sharper than the good butter knife. Even the household staff have perfected the art of moving silently, avoiding sudden movements that might draw attention. The only creature immune to the tension is the cat, who perches regally on a nearby chair, cleaning her paws and pointedly ignoring the discussion of marriage prospects. Eventually the subject shifts. "You must eat more, dear. You're looking pale," you oblige, trying not to wince as the porridge attempts to bond permanently with your molars. "Your health is important. No one wants a sickly bride." Another classic. You consider pointing out that you're in robust health and could probably wrestle a small bear, but Victorian women are supposed to be delicate, not feral. By the time breakfast ends, your nerves are as frayed as the family tablecloth. You excuse yourself, plate in hand, making a mental note to practice your diplomatic skills for tomorrow's round. Aunt Cordelia watches you go, her gaze softening for a brief moment. Beneath the criticism, you know there's concern misplaced but genuine. She wants you secure, happy, settled, and, ideally, married to someone who owns at least a small vineyard. As you retreat to the sanctuary of the kitchen, you consider the possibility of inventing a secret admirer just to liven up next week's breakfast. For now, though, you savour the quiet as the clatter of plates gives way to the gentle murmur of the house waking up. Another morning survived, another victory in the ongoing absurd tournament of Victorian family life. If all else fails, there's always the jam. How does one fill an endless sea of free time? You embroider, write letters, and maybe reorganise the linen closet for the 4th time this week. The danger of existential crisis increases with each idle hour. Welcome to the subtle art of keeping busy Victorian single woman edition. There are no scheduled meetings, no children to supervise, no estate to manage. Just you and the delicate terror of a clock that ticks far louder when it's not counting down to anyone's return. In the background, the grandfather clock ticks out a kind of Morse code for do something useful or perish of irrelevance. You begin as many before you with embroidery. It's the universal language of the unattached. You select a sampler, perhaps a favourite proverb about patience, or a slightly passive-aggressive warning to nosy relatives. Each stitch is a meditation, each flower or script letter a tiny act of rebellion against boredom. Needlework is both creative and soothing until you realise you have now produced more doilies than the entire county could possibly use. The sofa is drowning in lace. Even the cat looks concerned. Once your hands cramp and you've started embroidering things that might be secret codes for send help, you move on to correspondence. Letter writing is the main event of the single woman's calendar. You draft careful missives to married friends, cousins abroad, and the local minister's wife. You comment on the weather brisk again, your health excellent in theory, and include subtle hints that you are indeed thriving. If you're feeling daring, you tuck in a pressed flower because nothing says I'm perfectly content like botanical proof of life. When the post is gone, the real challenge begins, inventing errands. Perhaps the silver needs polishing. It doesn't, but you polish it anyway. Perhaps the linen closet needs reorganising. You can alphabetize by monogram, by season, or even by perceived emotional importance. The satisfaction is fleeting but real. You create systems and charts that would make the Continental Army jealous. There's always reading novels, poetry, and, for the truly bold, the latest periodicals full of cautionary tales about women who strayed from the path of virtue and found only theatre tickets and existential satisfaction. You read them all, mentally annotating the bits you disagree with, then promptly forget everything until someone tries to debate you at tea. Household management is another cornerstone of your day. It's your duty to make sure the cook knows that, yes, you do still want oats for breakfast, and no, the biscuits should not contain a hint of adventure. Code for last week's leftover raisins. You supervise the cleaning with the gravitas of a general inspecting his troops. You give the gardener thoughtful nods as he explains the state of the daisies, secretly marvelling that they survive at all. Considering your track record with indoor plants, your afternoons are dedicated to charitable endeavours. You make rounds to visit the ailing, carry food parcels to the needy, and serve at the neighbourhood church. It's half benevolence, half evidence of your existence for the local gossip network. You're a constant presence at every needlework gathering, scripture study, and community kitchen, demonstrating to society that unmarried women shouldn't be sympathised with but respected for their unstoppable talent at sorting donations. When nothing else presents itself, you create tasks. A fresh memory book, a genealogy chart that might reveal a hidden noble ancestor, a comprehensive study of every preserved variety produced locally, organised by sharpness and suitability for emergency suite courses. On certain days you simply move through each room, making sure everything stays in its proper place, volumes aligned, blooms fresh, and that puzzling creaky floorboard in the corridor remains unsolved. As twilight approaches, you examine your territory, a home in flawless condition, a spirit only mildly worn, and the quiet accomplishment of surviving another day without accidentally disrupting the delicate balance of proper society. So, as darkness falls, you ready yourself for the evening hours, understanding that tomorrow will present another endless stretch of time and the chance to stitch yet another cautionary message about uninvited opinions. You don your hat and venture outside, seeking wellness, moral strength, and perhaps, if fortune smiles, an exciting meeting with the neighbouring dog. Strolling unescorted is uncommon, but you are, ultimately, an enigmatic figure. The journey begins with careful planning. A proper Victorian stroll isn't something you do on impulse. You choose appropriate walking attire for this time of day. Nothing overly sombre, that's for early hours. Nothing excessively vibrant, that invites the sort of notice you'd rather avoid. You lace up your most dependable footwear, those reliable companions that have traversed more country lanes than potential suitors. Last comes the bonnet, positioned perfectly, protecting your complexion from both sunlight and prying eyes. If you're feeling especially daring, you slip a book into your small bag, prepared for quick reading beneath a leafy shelter. Yes, you rebel. Crossing the threshold, you steel yourself for the genuine hazard of Victorian wandering. Public visibility, every lace curtain flutters. Elderly Mrs. Farnsworth holds her customary position, knitting tools chattering like Morse code as she monitors your journey down the street. You're certain your activities will reach half the congregation before nightfall. An unaccompanied woman taking a solitary walk sparks curiosity. Is she hunting for a spouse? Or something more dangerous, independent thoughts? Maybe she's depleted her sewing supplies and is bound for the notion shop. In a moment of bold self-reliance, you inhale the atmosphere, which carries traces of horses, coal fumes, and the slightest hint of approaching weather. The rural landscape, or if you're urban dwelling, the nearest stretch of reasonably clean roadway stretches ahead. Your objective is straightforward. Move at a steady pace, appear neither overly curious nor completely without purpose, and avoid treading on anything deposited by local farm animals. With luck, you might encounter a friendly gardener or another walker, probably another single lady equally committed to appreciating the outdoors without mishap. This excursion balances personal liberty with social expectations. You remain on acceptable routes, acknowledging strangers courteously. You're cautious not to pause too long beside the waterfowl pond. Previously, it resulted in a stern talk about solitary daydreaming, or wander too close to the forest, which might fuel speculation about romantic literary tendencies. Sometimes a mounted gentleman passes by, touching his hat brim, a gesture that will certainly reach your relative by tea time, transformed into a marriage proposal by dinner. While walking, your thoughts roam freely, even when your steps cannot. You draft correspondence mentally, reorganize the sitting room in your mind, and wonder about the puzzling new household that settled at the village outskirts. Occasionally you picture yourself as a literary character, maybe the quietly intelligent protagonist, or during difficult days, as the nameless figure who collapses theatrically early in the story and disappears forever. Each expedition presents small challenges. A sudden breeze threatens to steal your bonnet. You wrestle it back with whatever grace possible when battling headwear publicly. Rough spots, standing water, and aggressive waterfowl all work together to challenge your poise. You persist, determined that nobody, particularly the neighbourhood watchers, will see you bested by barnyard creatures. There are modest pleasures. The neighbour's dog, predictably, rushes over for a friendly investigation before returning to its own secret business. You stop to appreciate a flowering bush, breathe in some herb fragrance, or save a snail from inevitable destruction. These represent quiet acts of defiance, a rejection of letting your existence be limited by indoor spaces and others' judgments. Finally, you head home, complexion slightly flushed from sun and exertion, spirits somewhat lifted from having escaped, even momentarily, the observation of furnishings and caring family members. You untie your bonnet, empty the gravel from your shoes, and observe the world from your entrance. You have wandered unaccompanied, unashamed, and with your pride largely preserved. For an unmarried Victorian lady, that constitutes sufficient triumph. You store the experience for later, possibly to incorporate into your next needlework sampler. She who ventures alone, ventures courageously, or at least boldly enough to survive the dog, the weather, and Mrs. Farnsworth's constant surveillance. Social hours commence, bringing the neighbours with them. You pretend enthusiasm for their presence, while they pretend not to be examining your front room for signs of instability, felines, or hidden romantic interests. Everyone departs slightly more doubtful than when they entered. The social mechanism of Victorian existence springs into action precisely at 3 o'clock, announced by soft chiming and the muffled alarm of a servant who wishes just once she could declare you absent. But you're not absent. You're present in the most courteous and least actual way. The visitor card dish waits beside the entrance, shining with optimism and gentle anxiety. You prepare yourself as footsteps sound in the hallway and the servant's voice quavers. Mrs. Strickland and Miss Plimpton wish to see you, ma'am. You welcome your guests in the front parlour, a space that exists purely for this function and therefore remains in perpetual readiness. Lace covers positioned with medical accuracy, cushions fluffed to breaking point, and precisely one volume on display. Scholarly, but not overly fascinating. The hearth sparkles. The timepiece ticks audibly, like a magistrate recording the exact duration of quiet moments. The callers enter grandly, glances sweeping the room with the skilled subtlety of experienced gossips. Mrs. Strickland, equipped with headwear that could house a small household, presents a smile just short of sincere. Miss Plimpton, younger and considerably more threatening, examines the shelf for evidence that you might be secretly unconventional. You gesture for them to be seated. They comply, settling carefully on the furniture edge, avoiding appearing too relaxed. Social calls are, naturally, an examination of etiquette, composure, and the durability of your chair covers. Refreshments are offered. The teapot trembles slightly in your grasp. Nothing reveals a lady's anxiety like pouring without spilling. Discussion starts hesitantly, as all Victorian exchanges do. With such crisp weather today, I trust it won't storm before I return home. This translates to, I'll depart at the first threatening cloud. You nod and concur, fighting the impulse to check the windows repeatedly. Subjects circle in carefully managed patterns. Mrs. Strickland's joint pain, Miss Plimpton's relative's musical performance, the continuing drama of the dairy workers' love affairs, which, if accurate, would require the dairy worker to be omnipresent. Sometimes there's a treacherous silence, that uncomfortable moment when all attention focuses on you, as though anticipating a sudden admission about harbouring rodents in the basement. You respond with pleasantries of your own, constantly concerned whether anyone has spotted the slight pet fur on the furniture. Perhaps the enigmatic book on the side table, Floral Studies of the Eastern Rivers, was too adventurous. You observe Mrs. Strickland handling the calling card tray, tallying the cards, and calculating your social position. The genuine conversation occurs through unspoken details. Who notices the vacant seat near the window meant for your fictional suitor? Who examines the flowers as if detecting traces of madness? Or worse, continental influences? And who discreetly adjusts their dress to avoid collecting animal hair? You question whether your attempt at effortless refinement, the appropriate number of partially read magazines, a somewhat drooping but authentic arrangement, has deceived anyone. Eventually, as the clock strikes the quarter hour, Mrs. Strickland announces she mustn't linger. There's a flurry of gracious farewells, and Miss Plimpton promises to share her recipe for surprisingly hearty pudding. Calling cards are traded, a final assessment is made of your mental condition, and the parlour returns to quiet. You shut the door and breathe deeply. The ceremony is finished. You've endured another session of neighbourly investigation and shared distrust. The calling card tray, now somewhat weightier, silently testifies to your continued membership in proper society, however tenuously, if only barely. You withdraw to the kitchen, where you and the cat, who has appeared smugly from beneath the sideboard, exchange a knowing look of relief. Company is draining. At least your mysteries, your pets, and your rationality remain, for the present, protected. Behind the courteous mask of tea and doilies until the following week, church serves as the place where reputations are established, ruined, or slowly eroded by rumour. You raise your voice in hymns, avoid meeting the minister's eyes, and hope your hat provides enough interest to overshadow your persistent unmarried state. The Victorian Sabbath opens with a recognisable routine, the meticulous choosing of a church outfit, preferably one that communicates both modesty and a solid foundation of millinery confidence. The journey to church resembles a procession of devotion, bonnet swaying, gloves immaculate, and footwear recently polished. You practice your expression in the entrance mirror, one that declares, "I am satisfied, complete, and definitely not contemplating the treats awaiting at home." Reaching the church, you survey the benches for tactical positioning. The front section is designated for the genuinely pious or the conspicuously prominent. The rear is for tardy arrivals and defiant young people. You select a respectable location in the centre, hoping to remain inconspicuous. Not a chance. The instant you settle, Mrs. Drabble from 3 rows forward rotates to study you through her magnifying spectacles, mouth set with the expectation of fresh gossip for her Thursday gathering. The service commences. You stand and sit, maintaining rhythm with a congregation that moves with the coordinated exhaustion of people who have practiced this their whole lives. The singing swells, some melodious, some valiantly off-key. You concentrate on your songbook, attempting not to let your attention drift to the recently betrothed Miss Pottlethwaite, glowing in her new handwear and satisfaction. You participate with the fervour of a woman determined not to appear uninterested, or more troubling, lonely. Then arrives the homily, a kind, meandering reflection on forbearance, modesty, or the dangers of vanity, one that invariably returns to the significance of kinship. You acknowledge respectfully and simulate profound contemplation while secretly questioning whether the minister accepts suggestions for next week's theme on the benefits of minding one's own affairs. Following the service, the day's real purpose begins social interaction. You exit into the churchyard, carried along by a wave of conversation. Salutations are shared, palms are clasped. Someone with tacky hands attempts to embrace you. It's an ordeal of delicate questioning. How are you managing, darling? Still residing at home. Anyone noteworthy? You provide diversions as expertly as sword parries, aiming to avoid being drawn into a discussion about the numerous pleasures of wedded life as described by people whose own unions possess all the warmth of a northern stone barrier. Church functions as a professional gathering disguised as spiritual sustenance. Marriage candidates are evaluated, competitions rekindled, partnerships forged over mutual criticism of the new keyboard player. You pause near the refreshment station, where the cookies provide both solace and danger, crumbling sufficiently to threaten your finest gloves. Miss Willoughby traps you with updates about her son's advancement, which sounds suspiciously like a diplomatic banishment to distant territories. Naturally, no Sunday would be finished without exploring local intelligence. A new family has appeared. Murmurs spread about the shade of their window treatments, decidedly exotic, and whether the daughter is musically gifted or simply anxious. The choir leader is locked in a quiet dispute with the bell operator, and everyone has a hypothesis about why the rector's berry bushes have disappointed this year. As the gathering disperses, you share a closing series of smiles, perfect your most thoughtful yet peaceful demeanour, and evade an attack from Aunt Eugenia, who waits near the cemetery entrance like a matrimonial predator. Home finally. You remove your gloves, free your hat from its pin-induced imprisonment, and sink down in exhaustion. Your position in the community survives, for now, undamaged. Your headwear was, as intended, a diversion. The chatter will shift, as it inevitably does, to another person's controversy before evening. You've weathered another week in the Victorian social system. Blessed, examined, and, at least publicly, entirely composed. Your clothing collection represents an unending sequence of dark garments, sensible shoes, and sufficient wraps to launch a modest enterprise. Sometimes you contemplate something bold, like brightness. Then you recall you're not here to create a sensation. The daily routine of dressing as an unmarried Victorian woman focuses less on individual fashion and more on following a rigid, unwritten guide created by generations of women with firm convictions and even stronger arms from carrying buckets of laundry starch. Each morning you approach your closet and encounter the most serious spectrum imaginable slate: midnight blue, worn purple, and that particular green best described as apologetic moss. It's a colour scheme intended to communicate I am respectable, reliable, and absolutely not highlighting my single status. You think practically first. Climate, social obligations, and crucially possible meetings with the town's evaluation committee composed of 3 senior ladies and at least 4 sets of theatre glasses. Dark wool dresses rule. They're useful, warm, and can absorb an entire cup of mild tea without revealing a mark. You choose one, smoothing the creases, and inspect for pet hair, proof of both your household skills and your secret friendship. First come the wraps. So many wraps. There's a wrap for every occasion. Morning stroll wrap. The house grows cold again. Wrap for the evening and the ceremonial my sister's betrothal celebration wrap. Some are hand-stitched, others woven, all of them essential. Throwing one across your shoulders is like enveloping yourself in the softest whisper. Theoretically, wraps are a style statement. Practically, they're a comfort blanket with decorative trim. Your shoes are sensible, made for walking to the market, the chapel, and the rare unsupervised trip to the letter office. Heels are modest, both from practicality and from the unspoken knowledge that nobody wishes to see an unmarried woman twisting her ankle on the main street. Your finest shoes are worn but dependable, with enough strength to survive both style changes and wet Tuesdays. Then the adornments, humble pins, practical mittens and caps created more for blending in than for recognition. Hat choosing is a careful art. You desire something that says, I am proper, without crossing into. I am desperately wishing for an offer at the butcher shop. A plume too bold? A bow, maybe. If you're feeling daring and have already penned your testament, there's always the dangerous urge to reach for brightness. A happy azure. A bold touch of amber. Sometimes you even press the material against your cheek, weighing the social ramifications. But recollections of hushed cautions at the needlework gathering remind you that style chances are best reserved for widows, performers, and continental ladies. You breathe out and replace it, selecting instead another soothing layer of charcoal. Foundation garments are the forgotten champions of the unmarried woman's closet. Solid underskirts provide warmth and the slim possibility of a fuller silhouette, while stays, though less severely tightened than those of your wedded contemporaries, still guarantee bearing and a regular portion of modesty. You might, on an optimistic day, include a collar insert for propriety, a style choice that declares, I possess mysteries and none of them concern my neckline. Should a notable occasion arise, church fair, far-off relatives' baptism, you may treat yourself to a cameo pin or a set of sleeves with mildly excessive trim. But otherwise your appearance remains steadily unremarkable, dependable as the dawn mail and nearly as thrilling. The final outcome is an ensemble crafted to satisfy everybody and nobody, especially yourself. Yet, as you examine your image, there's solace in the habit, the gentle shield of usefulness and consistency. You may not create fashion, but you're always ready for an unexpected downpour, an unplanned call from the pastor, or another day of dignified, understated existence in the constantly observing Victorian society. Besides, you can always stitch a hidden note in your hemline, something truly outrageous like "fetch me pastry." Once upon a time you might have been prominent in social circles. Now you visit balls mainly as a warning story. The only thing more limited than your options is the refreshment. The Victorian matrimonial scene, despite its romantic title, resembles less a petal-scattered walkway and more the clearance section at a general store. Post-holidays, all the finest items are already claimed. The remaining choices are questionably damaged, and the illumination is both stark and merciless. You, with your precisely pressed gown and pre-rehearsed comment about the climate, position yourself at the ballroom's perimeter as the orchestra warms up and the initial confident pairs glide onto the floor. Your introduction to society was once announced by a flurry of ivory gowns, nervous mothers, and flower displays large enough to hide a small relative. There were galas, gatherings, and lawn parties, all devoted to the holy mission of transforming suitable young ladies into even more suitable brides. You were displayed, presented, and gently steered toward any gentleman who wasn't already spoken for, banished, or concealing behind the potted plants. During those days, optimism fluttered in your chest. Every dance held potential, every look across the hall was the beginning of a future romantic tale. But with each successive season, the thrill faded, admirers diminished, engagements became gossip material, and the whole affair transformed from "who will she wed" to "does she still attend?" You discovered yourself lingering near the food station, creating bonds with other survivors, unmarried women in training with a mutual love for citrus treats and shared hopelessness. Now your invites arrive with a feeling of dread. You participate because it's anticipated, because there's always a slight chance that some recently available uncle or distant friend's acquaintance will appear in a haze of cologne and crushed dreams. You approach the dancing area with the resolve of someone preparing for minor warfare. If fortune smiles, you'll be requested for a country dance by a timid minister, or, lacking that, a turn around the room with the host's youngest boy, who is 13 and more fascinated by the fruitcake than your speaking abilities. Your attendance at these functions is obligatory, your expression well practiced. The other attendees are equally conscious of what's at stake. There's an undeniable subtext to every interaction. Are you still unattached? Have you considered relocating to Brighton? Have you thought about mastering the violin? You respond courteously, meanwhile fighting the impulse to answer, "Only if I can employ it as a club." The refreshment, meanwhile, becomes more diluted with every passing year, as though the organisers are gradually thinning it down in compassion for your diminishing romantic chances. The finger foods are parched, the sweets are old, and the chatter is both persistent and half-baked. Someone will invariably mention a lady who secured a wonderful marriage in her final season, but you know her family possessed wealth, influence, or the kind of smile that makes physicians weep with envy. During the evening, you become a suitable confidant for the love-struck and the dejected. Younger ladies share their dreams in your ear, their mothers observe you with combined pity and worry, and the available gentlemen, scarce as they are, move around the room like cautious deer. There's always one who is both mysteriously rich and strangely friendless. Even your relative seems to abandon hope by the third dance, her matchmaking attempts dissolving into forced chuckles and reminders to maintain your composure. As the night progresses, you position yourself at the dancing area's edge, quietly celebrating others' fortune and rehearsing your gracious defeat expression. You consume another wilted sandwich, taste the world's most watered-down punch, and comfort yourself with the knowledge that at least you possess both feet, both gloves, and a fern that adores you without conditions. The evening concludes with courteous goodbyes, a frigid coach journey home, and the understood agreement that next time you might simply remain indoors with literature and a dish of tea cakes. The marriage marketplace is closing shortly, but you, resilient and mildly entertained, remain very much available for whatever existence offers next, whether it's a gentleman caller, a fresh story, or simply another portion of dessert. Embroidery, because it's less provocative than verse and repeatedly piercing something, is surprisingly calming. You create lengths of trim while silently critiquing everyone's stance at the stitching circle. For the Victorian unmarried lady, needlecraft isn't merely a pastime, it's a way of being. Each morning after breakfast, you gather your implements, fingertips, pins of every size, a spectrum of yarns and a container of partially completed works. Your seat becomes a terrain of table runners, chair protectors, and endless measures of unfinished trim destined to survive you by multiple generations. There's constantly something to repair, enhance, or if you're feeling rebellious, privately undermine. With a strategically placed tangle, needlework becomes your pass to respectability, your entry to hushed rooms and even more hushed rumours. It's also an intensely competitive pursuit, though nobody acknowledges it openly. The stitching circle serves as your battlefield, the sitting room, your arena. You arrive bearing your current creation, perhaps an intricate sampler displaying quotes about morality and self-control, and brace for several hours of measured sewing and even more carefully measured discussion. Here, the guidelines are straightforward. Maintain proper posture, thread your needle smoothly, and never, never stain the fabric. The other ladies assume their positions around you, equipped with their own projects and a collection of thinly disguised observations. "Oh, is that your 6th pillow covering this month?" someone inquires. Eyebrows rise toward the ceiling. "I truly appreciate your commitment." You grin, stitch, and devise your retaliation by embroidering miniature, anatomically questionable fowl onto her wedding present. While your hands stay occupied, your thoughts wander freely. You absorb the newest neighbourhood scandal, discovering that Mrs. Patterson's terrier has escaped once more, probably seeking superior companionship, or that the new minister's mother was spotted purchasing trim, continental trim. You evaluate every word for concealed significance. Rumours, like thread, work best when woven carefully and secured inconspicuously. Needlework serves as training, treatment, and sometimes rebellion. When discussion shifts to marriage possibilities, double your pace, creating lines of stitches with the focused determination of a woman planning to earn recognition at the international competition of subtle domestic resistance. Your sampler quickly displays phrases like serenity and endurance and heaven help this household, mottos with sufficient vagueness to make your guardian nervous. Naturally, needlework isn't exclusively a collective pursuit. On quiet afternoons, you occupy a bright window, teacup nearby, and immerse yourself in the soothing pattern of material and thread. There's strength in transforming simple cotton into a work of art, or at minimum a table covering that won't shock the minister. Sometimes, when nobody's observing, you try designs not found in any proper household manual, fanciful creatures, hidden initials, or most boldly a hint of brightness. Needlework becomes your inheritance. You picture future generations examining your works, questioning why one pillowcase displays a mythical beast and the words "fear nothing." Perhaps someone will receive your assembly of pocket squares, each one a lesson in endurance and a quiet documentation of how many uncomfortable family meals you endured, with only your embroidery for support. There's inevitably the awareness that your talents are squandered on people who cannot distinguish fine work from basic crafting. But you understand the reality. In a society where you're judged by your household production, your needle serves as both protection and weapon. You may not earn awards, but you do gain the pleasure of outlasting every passing style trend and impressing even the most critical relative with your perfect button work. When evening arrives, you store your project, stretch your aching hands, and permit yourself a small, triumphant grin. You have sewn your way through tedium, criticism, and the general foolishness of Victorian unmarried life. Tomorrow you'll repeat the process, because nothing declares I am flourishing quite like 300 yards of trim and a sampler that states attending to my own affairs since 1852. Tea hour brings the pleasure of cookies, the sharp pain of offhand comments about your circumstances, and the endless march of other people's offspring. The sugar container receives heavy use. So does your talent for feigning delight. The clock strikes 4, and the house suddenly fills with the anticipation of polite social mayhem. The tea service is brought in, a dazzling array of pots, unmatched cups, and sufficient sugar lumps to launch a small Victorian child into space. You assume your customary spot near the glass, preparing yourself for what is certainly the day's most challenging endurance test. The fragrance of Earl Grey drifts through the parlour, barely concealed by the subtle scent of nervous perspiration. Before you've finished your first cup, the visitors start appearing, each followed by a group of children like goslings, trailing a particularly determined parent. There are relatives with viewpoints, family members with messy hands, and neighbours who consider just dropping by a divine mission. You welcome each with a peaceful smile that communicates, yes, I am completely satisfied with my life decisions. Even as your internal dialogue considers the benefits of joining a wordless religious community, tea gets served, treats are presented, and the show commences. Discussion wanders from the secure topics like weather, the unfortunate condition of the neighbour's roses, to the dangerous territory. So, darling, do you have any updates? This expression is the Victorian signal for, is there any possibility you've caught a husband since last Tuesday? You smile, redirect, and grab a pastry, starches being the single lady's greatest protection. The children, meanwhile, are omnipresent. One is tapping a utensil against the cabinet, another is examining a biscuit with academic precision, and 2 others are participating in what seems to be contact needlework. Someone drops tea, someone else topples the sugar. You react with serene competence, distributing towels and providing another plate of butter cookies, wondering at the child's ability to devour more confections than logic suggests reasonable. Between requests for additional helpings, your visitors provide guidance as though it's the newest trend in self-improvement. You know, I've read that energetic walks are quite good for a lady's skin tone, mentions one aunt, studying your pale complexion. And have you considered learning painting? I understand artists are quite fashionable in London. You smile, agree, and carefully resist the desire to embroider. Please cease speaking onto the tea linens. No tea session is finished without tales of friends who discovered romance in the most unexpected circumstances. Did you learn about Miss Henderson? Encountered her intended in the strangest way. His vehicle splashed her on the boardwalk. You pretend interest. Privately, observing that your most recent notable incident involved a hostile swan and a damaged bonnet. These stories predictably return to you, the room growing quiet with gentle, optimistic silence, as though awaiting your own surprise betrothal to emerge from behind the decorative plant. The second teapot gets filled, chatter grows louder, and the cookies disappear. Your expression remains steady, your agreement becomes progressively distant, and you consider changing to coffee simply for the boost of forbidden stimulation. The children now play a game that appears to involve concealing your finest doilies beneath the instrument. You allow them. After all, you possess more doilies than disappointments. Eventually, as daylight dims and the sugar bowl empties, your guests collect their children and their unwanted counsel. Commitments are made to repeat this shortly, and faces are pinched with disturbing enthusiasm. The parlour clears. Quiet returns and you release your breath, thankful for the calm and the final remaining cookie. You sip your remaining tea, thinking about another successful navigation of the social challenge course. Despite all its disorder and commentary, afternoon tea remains your preferred time of day. It demonstrates you can survive any difficulty, provided you have adequate sugar, patience, and several secret caches of shortbread reserved exclusively for yourself. You serve as the ideal guardian, dependable, unnoticed, and unfortunately unmarried. Your compensation? Sitting in the corner, clutching someone else's fan while attempting not to stare directly at suitable bachelors. It's like being a human houseplant. It invariably starts identically. A niece or family member arrives breathlessly, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, announcing that she's received an invitation to the most significant social gathering of the season. This might indicate anything from a formal evening ball to an afternoon of uncomfortable conversation over lukewarm fruit punch. As the reliable single lady of the household, so reliable actually that nobody worries you'll disappear with a suitor, you're immediately drafted as supervisor. Your mother glows with pride and subtle relief, and your young responsibility regards you with a mixture of appreciation and panic. Your preparations are simple. You choose your most forgettable dress, arrange your hair in a style that announces I am trustworthy, and equip yourself with all the necessary tools. A fan to hold, not yours, a handkerchief for another's weeping, and an emergency stash of mint drops in case romance falters and requires a sugar-powered restart. You establish your position at the gathering, locating a seat in the corner sufficiently removed from the activity to avoid participation, but near enough to provide a sense of moral oversight. There you remain, becoming part of the decor, a respectable, quiet witness occasionally confused for a decorative shrub or a remarkably realistic sculpture. The other attendees barely acknowledge you, except for the occasional older ladies who nod approvingly at your attendance, confident that not a single dance will result in anything remotely inappropriate under your vigilant supervision. Observant gaze. Your main responsibility is to witness everything and nothing simultaneously. You observe flirtations, observe the exchange of messages, and observe your own capacity to stay conscious through another discussion about the temperature. The young pair before you try casual dialogue, their speech stumbling over anxiety and the awareness that every movement is being quietly documented for later analysis at the morning meal. You pretend to study a periodical, but maintain one ear carefully tuned to the patterns of Victorian romance. The anxious giggles, the accidental touching of hands, the perfectly timed remark about next week's garden exhibition. You become the keeper of personal items, fans, shawls, purses, and on one notable occasion, a pair of lace-edged gloves that you suspect were left behind intentionally. No problem. Your lap serves as storage for all sorts of feminine accessories. Occasionally you're asked to create a diversion, a sudden requirement for reviving salts for theatrics, an unexpected question about the newest novel for an exit strategy, or most crucially, a well-timed clearing of throat that stops an unwise confession of devotion. Your attendance guarantees that nothing remotely inappropriate occurs. Should a young gentleman become too forward, you employ the chaperone glare, a subtle yet crushing look that could destroy flowers at 50 feet. If conversation halts, you're ready with stories about far-off relatives and even more distant admirers, narratives crafted to eliminate romance completely. It's a delicate equilibrium, promoting just enough attraction to maintain interest, but not so much that an engagement erupts before the tea arrives. You spend the event in a pleasant suspension, never completely involved in the activities, but always essential to the mechanics of courtship. Your sole companions are the occasional passing gentleman who glances your direction in brief horror, and fellow chaperones with whom you share understanding looks. Throughout the room, there exists a sisterhood founded on mutual tedium and shared respect. At night's end, your young ward returns, eyes glowing, heart whole and reputation preserved. The family feels grateful, society feels reassured, and you, ever the dependable observer, go home with a lap full of accessories and the understanding that you have once more fulfilled your duty as the quiet guardian of Victorian romance. You withdraw to your chamber, consider the evening's lack of incidents, and treat yourself to a fine book and a biscuit, pleasures saved for those who keep their own hearts safely removed from circulation. If only for this evening, a genuine spinster's sanctuary, the family bookroom. Here, you can study travel accounts, poetry, and the rare provocative novel, provided nobody discovers you sighing over the Italian romantic verses. A particular kind of peace settles over you as you escape the drawing room, pastries tucked away, finding refuge in the blessed quiet of the study. The heavy door shuts with that wonderful thud, signalling independence, solitude, and blessed respite from inquiries about your future. The atmosphere carries that reassuring scent of bound leather and settling dust, with afternoon light streaming through glass panes, illuminating a wayward plume from someone's forgotten writing instrument. This, you realise, is sanctuary incarnate, equal measures parchment and potential. You settle into your worn armchair, its fabric weathered, cushions bearing gentle impressions from countless book lovers who preceded you. Surrounding you, bookcases groan under family scriptures, geographical surveys, and endless collections of Sir Walter Scott's writings, purchased during patriotic fervour and promptly neglected after initial enthusiasm waned. Certain titles feel intimate as childhood memories. Others hint at exotic destinations, forbidden romance, or intellectual challenges beyond your grasp. Studying within the family collection becomes both retreat and rebellion. Here you transcend being merely the unmarried daughter, the dutiful niece. You transform into an adventurer, a scholar, a literary pioneer exploring uncharted regions, even territories sometimes labelled inappropriate for refined ladies. You select an expedition journal about the Orient, envisioning yourself conquering mountain peaks armed with nothing but reliable parasol and sharp intelligence. Perhaps instead a delicate poetry collection where you can safely swoon over Mediterranean verses while pretending to ignore how frequently the protagonist appears mysteriously brooding. Risk always accompanies such endeavours. Family collections overflow with forbidden treasures, volumes with marked passages, sentences struck through in careful graphite, or complete sections sealed by overly cautious relatives. These modifications only heighten your fascination. You develop investigative skills, interpreting faded script and understanding what rendered certain memoirs so scandalous originally. During particularly daring moments, you conceal contemporary novels borrowed from acquaintances, hiding them behind reference works until circumstances permit. Sometimes your haven faces invasion. A brother charges in seeking misplaced classical texts or elusive game components. You shut your book with rehearsed casualness, prepared to declare you were merely reviewing cartography. Nothing extraordinary. Aunt Eugenia, perpetually suspicious, might peer inside and investigate for evidence of unsuitable literature, her attention scanning spines for anything contemporary. Should she discover you sighing over Italian sonnets, you insist it's linguistic exercise. Most educational, you assure her, while hastily closing pages dripping with passionate longing. Left undisturbed, you surrender to your wildest literary fantasies. One moment, you're exploring ancient pyramids with archaeologists. The next, you're decoding mysterious poems by starlight, or embroidering imaginary monograms into your garment hems while consuming serialized tales from metropolitan newspapers. Written words possess transformative power, gentle rebellion allowing your imagination to venture where your restricted form never could. You find solace knowing every household harbours secret readers, forebears who penciled hopeful marginalia or preserved flowers between pages as reminders that wonder exists everywhere for those seeking it. Within the study's stillness, your thoughts and aspirations remain yours alone, temporarily shielded from society's scrutiny, elders' matrimonial schemes, and even the gentle dictatorship of afternoon refreshments. When you finally emerge, complexion glowing with verse and mischief, you carry some of that enchantment with you. its hidden defiance, invisible yet illuminating your existence just slightly brighter, reminding you that even in the most conventional life, excitement waits between written lines. While some ladies accumulate porcelain, you gather living companions, felines, hounds, the occasional songbird. They judge less harshly than society, and someone consistently welcomes your appearance, even if only during feeding time. Animal friendship represents one of Victorian spinsterhood's genuine advantages, despite ensuring your dress never lacks fur and there's perpetually some stray down floating in your morning beverage. The residence, despite its imposing propriety, feels marginally less hollow when filled with barking, punctuated by gentle paw sounds and occasional canine snoring beneath your preferred seat. In a world fixated on standing and wedding bands, pet devotion feels refreshingly uncomplicated. No matchmaking necessary. Your primary companion naturally becomes the household cat, Empress Josephine, christened for her majestic demeanour and absolute refusal to obey anyone. She embodies velvet touch and razor talons, royalty among domestic creatures and master of silent disapproval. She observes every guest with suspicious slits and perches, tail positioned precisely, challenging anyone to mention your unmarried state. Cats excel at ignoring social advancement, provide occasional cream dishes and access to the warmest windowsill, and you earn, in her estimation, suitable companionship. Canines offer less complex, but considerably noisier affection. There's the lapdog, Lady Marmalade, perpetually decorated with bows, and a massive plodding spaniel, Sir Barks-a-Lot, who believes existence serves solely to protect the garden entrance and terrorise mail carriers. The small dog shadows you room to room, eternally hopeful for crumbs, attention, or occasional gossip overheard beneath refreshment tables. The larger dog provides reassuring presence, his faithfulness unwavering despite snoring loudly enough to rattle dishware. Then come the more unusual additions to your collection. A canary in ornate housing singing bravely each dawn, 2 indignant turtles who disapprove of all domestic modifications, and, according to whispered rumours, a mouse stealing morsels from beneath the dining furniture. You champion these creatures against relatives who grumble about unmarried women and their beasts, as though collecting living friendship indicated moral deterioration. Your pets structure and define daily hours. Feeding becomes joyous celebration, Empress Josephine circling with regal patience, Sir Barks-a-Lot voicing opinions about the menu, and Lady Marmalade staging protests until you produce delicacies. Dog walks provide excuses to escape both residence and uncomfortable social situations. Grooming the cat proves as contemplative as any worship service, perhaps more so. They also serve as excellent conversational partners. You narrate daily occurrences to your furry audience, sharing concerns about latest correspondence from married friends, shocking condition of Aunt Eugenia's foot ailment, or ongoing debates about planting marigolds versus foxgloves. The canary listens without interruption, dogs with devoted patience, and the cat with obvious doubt, an arrangement far superior to any formal gathering. Naturally, pets present certain complications. Cat fur infiltrates every wrap and sofa, subtle evidence of your domestic priorities. The dog once embarrassed himself before the minister, and the canary occasionally feels inspired to contribute during moments requiring absolute silence. You accept these inconveniences cheerfully. Every relationship demands compromise after all. Village whispers circulate about the woman with numerous animals, but you wear this reputation proudly, better remembered for compassion than caution, for joy and muddy prints than a lifetime spent waiting for others to make you feel worthwhile. Day's end finds you curled with your 4-legged friends, comforted by their warmth and simple loyalty. In their presence, you discover peace, undisturbed by social demands. It's impossible feeling truly isolated with a lapful of fur and harmonious snoring lulling you to sleep. You might be unmarried, but that hardly means you're inactive. Serving at the charity kitchen or visiting orphanages gives your existence meaning and, more crucially, prevents neighbours from suspecting you're cursing their livestock. In Victorian England, charitable endeavours practically constitute a secondary profession for respectable single women. Each morning brings fresh opportunities to rescue your reputation from slow strangulation of perceived worthlessness. Halfway through morning tea, you've already received reminders from both family and society that only steady schedules of good deeds separate you from becoming that peculiar woman with suspiciously numerous cats. Your charitable pursuits begin at the local soup kitchen, a vast, echoing chamber filled with steam, clattering utensils, and comforting chaos of humanity requiring assistance. You don your most sensible apron, the one with minimal decorative touches, and join a line of similarly motivated women, all dispensing nourishment with purpose typically reserved for military campaigns. Hierarchy exists naturally. Younger ladies manage bread distribution, senior matrons oversee soup service, and you, positioned somewhere between, alternate between offering additional portions and gently monitoring behaviour. The work proves both humbling and, honestly, quite fulfilling. You master reading people's requirements. A timid orphan needing encouragement, an exhausted mother desperate for extra spoonfuls, an elderly gentleman wanting nothing more than conversation and perhaps another biscuit. During these moments, your personal concerns fade. For several hours, you're defined not by marital status, but by helpfulness, kindness, and remarkable ability to spread preserves on bread with extraordinary efficiency. When soup duties conclude, you embark on visits to the local orphanage. Here your entrance triggers enthusiastic mayhem. Children surge forward tugging at your skirts. Hands sticky from whatever previous visitor distributed. You arrange activities, share stories, and attempt mediating ownership disputes over particularly worn wooden toys. The children demonstrate fierce loyalty to you, not because you bring presents, though occasional sweet bags never hurt, but because you listen, laugh, and never treat them as objects requiring pity. It's not all touching moments and appreciative smiles, naturally. Challenges abound. Difficult children, endless documentation, and constant nagging sense that no good deed escapes neighbourhood notice. Charity in this era concerns being observed as much as accomplishing good. Eyes always watch, calculating your contributions, prepared to discuss your efforts at the next sewing circle or Sunday gathering. You learn performing compassion with proper mixture of modesty and effectiveness, careful appearing neither ostentatious nor insufficiently enthusiastic. Weekends might involve fundraising activities, a church fair here, a bake sale there, each elaborate excuse for local matrons to compete in the noble sport of whose sponge cake rises highest. You attend meetings, record minutes, and practice delicate art of convincing wealthy bachelors to contribute a guinea or two for the orphans' Christmas fund. Sometimes you wonder if you should maintain charitable hour tallies and compare them with your cousin's matchmaking attempts. Still, genuine meaning exists in your efforts. The world overflows with people needing warm meals, attentive ears, or brief escapes from hardship, and providing for them, you find community spirit unconnected to marriage certificates or rings. Your charitable works become family of their own, a patchwork of faces, stories, and gratitude, lasting longer than any gossip or passing trend. Following long days, you return home exhausted but satisfied, apron speckled with soup and heart slightly lighter. Whatever others might say about you, let them say you were useful. And if you simultaneously saved your reputation while helping others, well, everyone benefits. Dining alone, the ultimate independence or the ultimate test of your confidence. You learn savouring cold lamb, lukewarm potatoes, and your own presence. Extra credit if you remember illuminating candles before darkness falls. The evening meal for a single Victorian woman becomes quiet ceremony, equal parts practical requirement and philosophical exercise. There's no bustling family gathering, no symphony of children's voices, and no husband debating boiled vegetable merits. Just you, a sideboard of modest aspirations, and the reassuring tick-tock of the standing clock counting passing moments. You assume your position at the table, consistently the same chair, always positioned for optimal fire view, or, during summer, the garden dissolving into dusky twilight. The meal itself hardly deserves correspondence, assuming you even have correspondence recipients. Tonight's selection features familiar standards: cold lamb, a potato having seen better days, and a pitiful mound of cabbage you suspect was boiled, not merely for tenderness but for emotional impact. You serve yourself with deliberate informality, grateful at least that nobody's present to critique your appetite or dining etiquette. Conversation, such as it exists, remains internal. You might congratulate yourself on successfully managing another day of social demands, or perhaps replay the morning's letter from a married friend. Was that subtle criticism about your independence, or merely awkward compliment? Occasionally you catch yourself commenting audibly about the gravy quality. The cat, never missing opportunities, materialises as soon as you sit, weaving around your chair hoping for morsels. You comply, and now you're two, woman and feline, both content avoiding bland potatoes. Solitary dining means controlling pace, no waiting for others to pass condiments or launch into lengthy monologues about parish happenings. You eat as rapidly or leisurely as desired. Some evenings you finish your plate in 5 efficient minutes and escape to your book. Other nights you dawdle, observing candlelight dancing and imagining yourself at a grand hotel with room service, an orchestral entertainment just beyond sight, your free indulging little habits that would shock family gatherings. You read at the table, supporting your book open with the bread container. You hum quietly the melody of a waltz from distant dances. You experiment with fresh napkin arrangements, inventing folding techniques that will never gain popularity. Occasionally, you might attempt recreating favourite recipes from the family's ancient cookbook, only discovering that a generous handful of lard isn't actually a precise measurement. But solitary dining isn't always perfect. Moments occur when the house feels excessively large and quiet, the clock's steady rhythm echoing in the emptiness. You wonder, not for the first time, if tomorrow you'll invite a neighbour, or perhaps dine with your unmarried friends, where laughter flows easier and lamb is mercifully absent. Or perhaps you'll simply set another place for the cat and declare it a gathering. As you clear the table, you contemplate the curious blend of solitude and contentment accompanying the spinster's dinner. Melancholy exists certainly, but so does tranquillity, gentle recognition that, for tonight at least, you answer to nobody but yourself. The plates chime softly in the kitchen, final crumbs swept away by candlelight, and you feel quietly victorious. You conclude the meal not with a toast, but with quiet acknowledgement to the clock, recognising another evening survived with dignity and mostly good spirits. And as you extinguish the flames and retreat to the library, you promise yourself that tomorrow's dinner will be warmer, the potatoes less tragic, and your company, whether human or animal, no less precious. Evenings exist for pastimes, reading or knitting socks nobody will ever wear. You might attempt some piano, or spend an hour contemplating your position in existence. The emptiness is never distant. Once dinner service is cleared and the house has settled into nightly stillness, you enter that most enigmatic phase of the Victorian day, self-entertainment. There are no streaming cues or endless digital scrolling, just you, a wavering fire, and the eternal question, what next? The lamp is adjusted, the drapes closed, and the evening extends before you as vast and mysterious as a windswept Bronte heath. You begin with the classics. A well-worn novel rests on your side table, comfort in both familiarity and slight mustiness. Tonight it's Austen, or perhaps Wilkie Collins if you're seeking melodrama. You nestle in your favourite chair, wrap drawn close, feet positioned beneath you for warmth. You read with one eye on text and another on the clock, timing your chapters to the rhythm of the settling house. Periodically, you pause, listening to the wind or distant sounds of someone dropping pottery on the neighbouring street. This, you assure yourself, represents peak entertainment. Knitting stars in your other solitary performance. You maintain a basket of projects nearby, each at different stages of completion. There are scarves with mysterious gaps, socks seemingly designed for legendary feet, and a patchwork covering whose colour combination defies natural law. The rhythmic clicking of needles soothes like any lullaby, and each finished row represents small victory over approaching tedium. You craft presents with your needles sometimes. Caps for children without parents, gloves for the church sale, or intricate covers for teapots that spark bewildered smiles from relatives and friends. On nights when energy strikes, you approach that grand piano commanding the parlour. You choose something soft, reflective rather than flashy, playing quietly while fingers occasionally trip over complex sections. Your melodies float upward, mixing with the smell of aged volumes and melted wax. Nobody else may be listening, but you perform for yourself and maybe the spirits of dashing fictional characters. Despite all your activity, some evenings simply won't be conquered. You catch yourself gazing into flames, tallying ceiling fractures, or pondering the destiny of dust clusters hiding under furniture. Victorian existence overflows with ceremony, yet solitude conducts the orchestra. Your thoughts drift to universal puzzles, to alternate lives where you wed the minister, or to the enduring mystery of your vanished silver spoons. You pen notes to companions, incomplete verses, journal passages swinging between amused acceptance and real yearning. Your penmanship grows more elaborate as hours pass. Sentences brimming with weather observations, feline commentary, or philosophical discussions about tea cookies. A special writing instrument awaits these moments, your small act of defiance since it was meant for your cousin's birthday. When restlessness wins, you might reorganize books by shade or likelihood of characters meeting tragic romantic fates, or you simply walk the corridor, hearing the house's settling whispers. The emptiness feels overwhelming sometimes, but you transform it into something serene, something exclusively yours. Finally, as flames dim and clicking slows, you collect yourself for sleep. The hollow sensation may hover at thought's edge, but you've conquered another evening soothed by tales, tiny creations, and your own reliable presence. Tomorrow brings fresh entertainment and new puzzles, but tonight's quietude belongs to you. There's always that narrative, the proposal that nearly happened, the gentleman who disappeared, or the connection that never formed. You revisit it during solitary nights, typically after excessive wine. It hides in mental corners, that specific incident, wrapped in luxury, memory, and slight mortification. Victorian unmarried ladies, despite their composed exteriors and apparent calm, aren't immune to private theatrics of what could have been. Yours deserves telling during storms or between finishing your second glass and considering a third. Perhaps it began at a summer lawn party or in the sitting room after dinner when others were busy analysing society gossip while you and eligible Mr. Presert, suitably British name, conversed by the glass. A glance occurred, lingering and hopeful, then awkward quiet broken by teacup sounds or your cousin's laughter across the room. Maybe he praised your needlework, recited verses, or asked suddenly if you'd seen Bath. You both chuckled at nothing and everyone else seemed distant. Then came the understanding, that vague Victorian ritual where two people agree through meaningful looks and weather-coded comments that arrangements might someday happen. He borrowed reading material and vowed to return it. You practiced writing misses with his name on paper scraps, then destroyed evidence in the fireplace like proper tragic heroines. For weeks, everything gleamed with possibility. You began caring more about your hair, kept your finest wrap freshly cleaned, and greeted the mail carrier each morning with unusual enthusiasm. Your aunt grew wary, your friends grew excited. Even your cat began accepting the idea of household addition, assuming he brought suitable gifts. Then, just when invitation seemed certain, he missed dinner. The book stayed unreturned. Soon town buzzed with news of his Scotland journey or sick family member, or worse, engagement to someone whose main asset was impressive wealth and a father in government. You received a courteous note, perhaps, written with the distant air of someone who'd forgotten your pet's name. The understanding evaporated. Afterward, life resumed its patterns, but sharper somehow. You found yourself ridiculously polite to strangers and more cutting about everyone's romance except your own. Your mother declared you fortunate. Friends mumbled about destiny, and the household dog assumed protective outrage whenever his name arose. Still, late at night, after final tea, you sometimes return to that almost proposal. It isn't quite regret, more like a smooth stone in your pocket. Familiar, worn, and slightly weighty. You imagine different endings. Maybe you'd be married now, running a home, writing letters full of stories about children and chickens and husbands who abandon boots in hallways. Or maybe not. Perhaps you'd have missed quiet evenings, solitary strolls, and freedom to read forbidden novels in libraries without anyone questioning biscuit locations. Eventually, the story becomes less wound and more amusing old tale, a private honour in the secret society of almosts. You share it occasionally with trusted friends, both laughing at male predictability and fate's mysterious workings. So you store that memory with your best handkerchief and sharpest letter opener. Life continues, proposals or not. After all, worse fates exist than living by your own rules, with good books, faithful cats, and wine bottles for nights when nostalgia visits. You aren't alone. You have companions, other equally unwed, equally mysterious women. Together you share stories, laughter, and enough wit to fuel the British Empire. The Victorian world may view single women as curiosities, oddities for pity, or prodding, but within your secret circle, you're absolutely legendary. There's comfort knowing that for every relative fretting about your future, at least one friend will happily analyse every failed courtship, every disastrous dance, and every well-intentioned advice ever served on tea trays. Your group forms a personality tapestry, the pragmatist, the dreamer, the cynic, and the eccentric visionary. Sometimes all these live in one woman, depending on weather and dessert. Your gatherings highlight the week, whether in each other's parlours, church back pews, or lending library aisles where you pass scandalous novels from gloved hand to gloved hand. You meet over tea, each bringing stories and snacks to communal feasts. You speak in cipher. How's that knitting project? Did your cousin's proposal crash yet? It's sanctuary from both worlds' pity and suspicion. These friendships are forged through shared experience. You've all endured clumsy matchmaking, whispers of poor dear, and dreaded moments when dance cards return blank. Yet together the sting softens through wit and understanding. You trade tales about terrible suitors, like one who spent entire picnics discussing pig breeding, or another who swooned at embroidery needle sight. You invent elaborate histories for yourselves, perhaps secret heiresses or undercover writers, or, on particularly dull days, members of obscure European royalty exiled for excessive intelligence. There's fellowship in shared small rebellions. You combine funds for theatre trips, exchange recipes containing dangerously generous sherry amounts, and write letters full of jokes and half-truths that would horrify your aunts. When one gets cornered at parties by persistent bachelors or relatives with bright ideas, others quickly intervene, providing distraction or rescue as needed. It's unspoken but ironclad code. Evenings bring informal salons, debating latest penny dreadful merits or arguing whether Lord Byron was genius or simply man with excessive hair. You read poetry aloud, sometimes your own, sometimes smuggled works by women with less patience for society's rules. Laughter rings honest and unrestrained during these precious hours. Nobody is a spinster. You're all women with minds, stories, plans. You plot imaginary adventures, renting seaside cottages, travelling to Italy, or starting literary magazines devoted entirely to the unwed and unafraid. Support flows as freely as tea. When illness strikes one of you, others bring broth and gossip sheets. When anyone feels down, the rest quickly remind her of her worth, not as someone awaiting rings, but as someone living life that's entirely hers. You celebrate each other's small triumphs, perfectly baked cakes, clever responses to tiresome aunts, days spent blissfully alone with novels, and no interruptions. As evenings end and groups scatter, you feel solidarity's gentle warmth. The world may never grasp your little society's fierce joy, but it hardly matters. In your secret circle, you're not left behind. You're moving forward, together, arm in arm, unclaimed, undefeated, and above all, unbothered. The empire can fuel itself. You have each other. People gossip. Sometimes they whisper you're a secret poet or practice witchcraft, or most scandalous, that you're perfectly satisfied. The truth is you're simply excellent at minding your own affairs. In small, echo-filled Victorian English towns, privacy is fantasy. Walls here, hedges watch, and Mrs. Dabble from 3 doors down has uncanny talent for appearing whenever you post letters. As a single woman, you're a walking newspaper. Every action ripe for speculation. Buy extra sugar at the market, clearly brewing something. Possibly love potions, more likely elaborate puddings. Wear new shawls. Either you've inherited secretly or fallen under Parisian fashion spell. A fate worse than death, according to local sewing circles. Little is needed to become rumour subject. Solo sunset walks might trigger curtain-twitching frenzies and urgent whispers about secret meetings. Never mind, your only companion is the neighbour's overfed spaniel. Afternoons spent writing or simply window-gazing are enough for speculation about mysterious correspondence or memoir composition, soon published under scandalous pen names. The most persistent rumour, naturally, is your excessive contentment. You smile privately, knowing how this rattles local order. Women without husbands should be pining, plotting, or deeply denying, not enjoying themselves. Your apparent happiness confuses and sometimes enrages neighbourhood professional worriers. Nobody can be that satisfied with just books and cats, they say, while eyeing your vegetable garden for forbidden knowledge signs or suspiciously thriving carrots. Gossip, truly, is less about you and more about entertainment needs. In towns where last week's greatest excitement was Mrs. Pennington's marmalade catastrophe, your spinster status provides endless story sources. You become a character in dozens of small-town dramas, sometimes tragic heroine, sometimes villain, occasionally unsung genius. Hum unrecognised tunes, and by tea time someone claims you're sending secret continental messages. Every Sunday at church, speculation hums. Notice she wore that grey shawl again? Proof of heartbreak, or at least thriftiness. See how she looked at the new curate? Obviously scheming. It's exhausting sometimes being so thoroughly misunderstood, but also oddly freeing. You find yourself creating tiny provocations, French phrases dropped in conversation, suspiciously well-tended rose bushes, afternoons reading poetry aloud on porches. The town obliges by spinning each detail into fresh, mildly unhinged theories. Occasionally you're tempted to embrace the legend. Why not leave candles burning late or walk home with skirts trailing dramatically? Why not let them believe you write secret novels by moonlight or keep locks of Lord Byron's hair in your diary? If people will talk, they might as well have something worthwhile. In private moments with your spinster circle, you trade most outlandish rumour stories. Someone once suggested you practiced palmistry. Another claims you're heir to Portuguese fortune, waiting for the right moment to escape with family silver. You laugh about it over tea, occasionally fanning flames just to see how far tales will travel. But ultimately, the real scandal is your genuine contentment. You've built life from small pleasures and quiet victories. The town may never understand you, but that's its own freedom. Let them gossip. Let them speculate. As long as you're left peaceful with books, pets, and your very mysterious smile, you're perfectly happy remaining the single woman everyone suspects. But nobody can quite explain. As night falls and wind howls through window panes, your mind receives visits from fears of old age, loneliness, and occasionally literal Victorian ghosts. You pull covers up and remind yourself tomorrow is another perfectly unremarkable day. The house never lives more than after midnight, when silence settles and every creak and sigh echoes through walls. You lie in your narrow bed, surrounded by starched linen fortress and musty lavender sachet scent. Shadows stretch and flicker along ceilings cast by your candle's sputtering remains. Air is cold, tinged with perpetual draughts no amount of shawls or extra quilts can fully banish. In darkness, your mind slips effortlessly from reasonable to ridiculous. Did you remember banking the kitchen fire? Will marmalade keep until morning? Or will some enterprising local mouse steal your last breakfast hope? Did that letter sent to your bath friend contain devastating spelling errors destined to haunt you for months? But then, as minutes pass, deeper fears surface. Sometimes it's old age dread of becoming subject of whispered stories. The lady who never married and now haunts her own home in mothball and regret clouds. You imagine the future. Grey hair, slower steps, houses slowly growing quieter as neighbours move or pass away. Will you be the mysterious figure children dare each other to wave at from gates? Will postmen forget your name? The existential unease builds, layered like blankets you keep pulling higher. Then there's fear of being alone, not just practically, but alone in grand cosmic ways. The sense that despite your best companionship efforts, human, feline or otherwise, you're simply a brief note in time's ledger. You recall every old maid warning, that peculiar Victorian prophecy designed to haunt imagination at precisely this hour. Of course, being Victorian, you're contractually obligated to worry about ghosts. It's impossible not to, especially in houses that settle and groan like dowager aunts after too much plum pudding. You've read enough novels to know every ancestral portrait has following eyes. Every faint wallpaper stain could echo family tragedy, and wind itself is often accused of being unhappy spirits. The cat doesn't help, pausing at doors with fluffed tails, staring intently at shadowed corners as if saying, "You see it too, don't you?" But most nights the only thing haunting your room is runaway imagination. You invent elaborate scenarios, escaped convicts seeking shelter, lost loves returning by moonlight, or most alarmingly, Aunt Eugenia arriving unannounced with eligible bachelor lists. The mind is an unruly house guest, rummaging through private drawers and flinging existential anxieties like crumpled handkerchiefs. To calm yourself, you perform nighttime rituals, tucking covers under chin, reciting half-remembered prayers, mentally reviewing tomorrow's tasks. Must re-alphabetize linen cupboard again. Sometimes you reach for books, letting Miss Austen's dry wit or Mr. Collins's melodrama distract you from more insidious worries. Other times, you simply count backward from 100, matching each number to memories or blessings until darkness feels less threatening and more like soft, familiar cloaks. Eventually, exhaustion wins. You fall asleep to wind sounds and reassurance that, however haunted nights may seem, morning always returns. The ghosts, both literal and metaphorical, retreat with sunrise. You awaken to another perfectly ordinary day. A cup of lukewarm tea, faint draughts under doors, and quiet pride of having survived night's parade of doubts. Tomorrow worries may creep in again, but for now you're safe, cocooned in bed, a little braver with every sunrise. In the end, you realise your legacy might be family story, well-embroidered sampler, or tiny fortune left to distant nephews, but perhaps, just perhaps, you're the reason your great-niece is allowed university. Victorian society obsesses over legacy. Who gets remembered and why? From grand marble statues in town squares to names inscribed in Bibles and brass plaques, everyone seems desperate to leave marks. For single women, though, legacy is more complicated. You have no children of your own to shape, or marital triumph stories to be recited at Christmas dinners. Instead, you carve your own kind of immortality from quieter things. The books you collected, charities you supported, recipes you perfected, and love you gave to anyone who needed it, whether or not they shared your surname. Of course, you are warned about your fate. From the first time you're called Miss instead of Mrs., you're reminded that unmarried women become lessons, cautionary tales whispered to younger generations. You are the aunt whose wedding china was never unpacked, the lady with mysterious attics, or the relative whose letters are always signed affectionately and with practical advice. There is comfort in this, knowing you have become a presence, a piece of family folklore, a footnote in family trees, one that some future genealogist will puzzle over and perhaps envy. But legacy is not all warnings and wistfulness. In your time, you have championed nieces and nephews, funded their piano lessons, slipped sweets into coat pockets, and introduced them to the kinds of books their mothers would have censored. You've served as confidant to your sisters, emergency childcare, holiday coordinator, and head baker of family pies. During every household emergency, yours was the door they knocked on for guidance, a warm cup of coffee, or simply refuge from the turmoil of their own homes. Your influence has been felt through gentler, more understated means. Maybe you started a book club for the local girls, contributed to the first women's clinic, or quietly sponsored education for a bright neighbour who later achieved remarkable things. Perhaps you showed your grandniece how to sew both fabric and ideas together, demonstrating that precise stitches and thoughtful words can both create something enduring. Decades later, when society has transformed beyond recognition, she might recall you as the first woman who convinced her that being both self-reliant and compassionate was entirely possible. Even your supposed quirks might eventually become your victories. Those embroidered wall hangings, once considered mere decoration, will be celebrated for their testimony. Handling my own affairs since 1852 displayed above the fireplace, with honour. The recipes you mastered, passed down and modified by each generation, will become precious heirlooms. Great Aunt Edith's lemon cookies add extra zest and a touch of defiance. The family will remember fondly, with wonder, how you always seemed available for everyone while somehow maintaining your own mysteries. Naturally, some will use your story as a warning. Don't become like Aunt What's-Her-Name, alone with just her tabby for companionship. But for every pitying shake of the head, someone else will see possibility in your narrative. The notion that you can forge your own course, construct a meaningful existence from the small freedoms others miss, and influence the world, however subtly, by living authentically. Ultimately, you understand that becoming either inspiration or cautionary tale depends entirely on your storyteller. Maybe you'll be both. And that seems appropriate. Some evenings when the flames burn low and existence feels intimate, you'll rest peacefully, knowing your legacy isn't measured in wedding bands or bridal veils, but in the joy you created, the literature you passed along, and the possibilities you opened for future generations. Because perhaps your greatest gift was showing others they could envision a different way of living. A life brimming with wonder, compassion, and stubborn determination never to disappear quietly into the shadows. More than just a story, but inspiration. And honestly, what more could anyone desire? Every community has one. The relentless matchmaker, equipped with her roster of suitable gentlemen and the unwavering conviction of a homing missile, forces you to master evasive tactics. Diving behind shrubbery, feigning sudden migraines, or developing suspicious devotion to faraway relatives requiring assistance. In Cornwall, it's practically entertainment, this endless game of social cat and mouse. Never underestimate the Victorian matchmaker. She's as tenacious as a debt collector and equally talented at cornering you during the worst possible moments. Mid-chew at the pastry shop, knee-deep in puddles outside the grocery, or most devastatingly while escaping to the mail office hoping for peaceful solitude. You feel her presence before spotting her. A subtle hint of rose water, the soft, threatening whisper of crisp petticoats, and that unmistakable gleam of resolve behind her spectacles. Your education starts young. You master recognizing the danger signals, a casual inquiry about your evening activities, sudden fascination with your thoughts on horticulture, always leading up to meeting Mr. Quite Modest but Prosperous, fresh from the colonies, or the ominous words, "You absolutely must meet someone." Experienced single women develop intuition for these ambushes and counter with gracious diversions and practiced disappearing tricks. Claiming illness is timeless. Nobody questions a woman pressing her temple and mumbling about dizzy spells. For trickier scenarios, you employ sophisticated maneuvers like concealing yourself in the supply closet during prime visiting hours or mailing yourself correspondence from fictional family members in desperate circumstances. Oh, I'd adore joining the minister's dinner party, but Cousin Beatrice simply can't endure another storm by herself. You understand her condition. Nobody understands her condition because Cousin Beatrice exists only in imagination. But in the game of avoidance, anything goes. You become skilled at using terrain strategically, crouch behind convenient bushes when spotting the matchmaker prowling the town square. Choose the circuitous path to the bakery, even if it means an additional mile trudge through muck, because facing Mrs. Thompson and her copy of Guidance for the Unattached is worse. During particularly challenging days, you develop mysterious new hobbies. Gathering wildflowers at inconvenient distances, supporting obscure art exhibitions, or suddenly volunteering for parish activities located a comfortable 5 miles away. Social gatherings become battlefields. Upon entering, you immediately survey for threats. The matchmaking relative is unmistakable. She's the one with sparkling eyes and an anxious bachelor hovering nearby, probably clutching some drooping flora. You graciously accept weak refreshments and position yourself near the family's most controversial elderly member. Nothing deters hopeful suitors faster than launching into tales of notorious Great-Aunt Prudence and her collection of preserved rodents. Sometimes you enlist backup. Fellow single women and sympathetic married friends create diversions, initiating urgent discussions or whisking you to the kitchen for assistance just as the matchmaker approaches. Honour exists among the unattached. You exchange intelligence, tactics, and occasionally fake engagement jewellery, helpful for convincing persistent meddlers that your affections are already claimed. Despite all the dodging and manoeuvring, there's genuine respect for the matchmaker's determination. Her motives are generally kind. She simply cannot fathom that fulfillment takes various forms, some excluding joint finances or embroidered pillowcases. You handle her gracefully, never too harsh, always slippery enough to maintain independence. Eventually, avoiding matchmakers becomes less about escaping marriage and more about protecting your freedom. You establish your place in society not as an incomplete element, but as the complete creation. And as you acknowledge Mrs. Thompson from safe distance, supposedly visiting Cousin Beatrice or perhaps just enjoying an afternoon rest, you experience quiet triumph. You might never earn recognition in Victorian courtship, but in the championship of self-determination, you're virtually unstoppable. Handling finances as an unmarried woman means navigating a boundary thinner than your tolerance at family celebrations. Your allowance covers necessities, a fresh handkerchief, periodic sweets, and exactly 0 impromptu journeys to France. Every penny is tracked, every desire measured against becoming known as that woman who couldn't pay the grocer. Victorian single living, financially speaking, is advanced training in inventive bookkeeping. You receive just enough for dignified survival, but insufficient to risk self-sufficiency or, God forbid, luxury. Your income arrives from father's inheritance, a careful uncle, or a fund established by relatives who trusted women with charitable work but never with investment returns. Each month begins with the ritual, ceremoniously opening your household ledger. You prepare your pen and confront endless columns of expenses: heating, lighting, lodging, the puzzling entry marked miscellaneous, typically meaning pastries and remorse. You calculate every cent spent on essentials and near essentials: washing, cleaning supplies, shoe repairs. The weekly periodical you claim is educational. Household necessities come first. You develop market instincts, detecting the slightest price fluctuation in vegetables or outrage over sudden tea increases. You master strategic shopping, investing in quality winter wear but refreshing last season's hat with new trimming rather than purchasing replacement. You ration indulgences: 1 sweet for each successfully dodged letter from Aunt Gertrude, 2 for braving the chilly marketplace, and a 3rd for surviving an afternoon with the matrimony committee intact. Naturally, emergencies arise: sudden roof damage, your pet's unfortunate meeting with the butcher's wagon, or invitations to charity events with unspoken expectations of contributions. You maintain emergency funds hidden behind your etiquette manuals. True alarm only strikes when touching the coin labelled Future French Adventure, which currently finances approximately 1 pastry at the train station in 1903. Social duties present another challenge: constant church collections, unexpected donation requests, or friends' celebrations requiring thoughtful gifts. You excel at noble regifting arts. Certainly Cousin Margaret won't recognise this soap holder, and creative presentation helps. A fruit basket appears rustic and considerate. When uncertain, you bake. Ingredients cost less than crystal, and excellent fruitcake distracts from missing silverware. Still, personal longing presents the greatest challenge. You admire beautiful volumes in shop displays, dream of seaside excursions, or imagine new clothing in colours that would make even stern relatives pause. But you hesitate too. Every wish gets evaluated, not just for expense, but meaning. Spending carelessly risks reputation: frivolous, wasteful, living beyond her means. No thanks. You'd rather be the spinster with perfect records. You discover creativity within constraints. When craving adventure, you borrow novels and travel continents freely. When wanting new clothes, you learn alteration and decoration, transforming last year's style into next season's original design. You trade recipes with friends, exchange blooms for seeds, and attend free presentations with enthusiasm of someone determined to extract maximum value from existence. Month's end brings tallying successes and regretting failures. Those extra pastries accumulate, but satisfaction is genuine. You might lack France, but you possess tranquility, spotless credit, and sufficient remaining funds for chocolate. And perhaps that represents the sweetest liberty of all. Without inheritance and nowhere else to go, you're the permanent assistant in a sibling's household, entertaining nieces, mending garments, and absorbing excess family tension. Like human potpourri, you're essential yet strangely overlooked, the spiritual predecessor of family text threads nobody actually monitors, existing as the unmarried sister teaches strategic helpfulness. When family welcomes you into their busy Victorian home, it's with peculiar mixture of appreciation, acceptance, and faint charitable spirit. You're assigned a humble room upstairs, distant enough from the nursery to avoid worse nighttime disturbances, yet close enough to fetch supplies, locate missing footwear, and serve as unofficial sentinel for dreaded visits from Great-Aunt Henrietta. Your schedule stays full, if not personally chosen. Morning starts early, and before your initial tea cools sufficiently, someone has requested assistance. Entertain the youngest with stories, repair father's jacket button, monitor breakfast porridge to prevent burning. Your hands stay occupied constantly. You repair, you retrieve, you mediate. Squabbles over final roles. Theoretically, this provides purposeful living. Practically, you're like residential equipment, as crucial to household function as the stove, provided you make no demands and hum quietly. You understand every family member better than they know themselves. Your sister depends on your steadiness when infants fuss or laundry emerges discoloured. Your brother-in-law shares concerns about employment, weather, and occasionally his frustration with orchard yields. Children adore you, but with the casual, thoughtless affection they show sunshine and sweets, constantly present, dependable, and perpetually overlooked. Your dedication earns peculiar invisibility. Family choices happen at dining tables, while your position remains at the serving area, ensuring plates stay filled and dessert gets distributed. When guests visit, you're introduced, if mentioned at all, as our Edith. Such wonderful help to us. Sometimes you suspect you could vanish entirely and family would only notice when socks went unmended or preserves ran empty. Yet you discover small pleasures in your role. You're privy to household's inner workings, witnessing every whispered scheme and quiet victory. You become everyone's confidant, children, staff, even pets. You know who's quarrelling, who's courting, and who's sneaking extra cookies. Your counsel, when offered, often gets dismissed until proving accurate, then receives baffled gratitude reserved for divine intervention. You adjust, carving tiny moments of freedom. Sometimes after daily chaos subsides, you slip away to your attic sanctuary with borrowed books and hot cocoa, your personal retreat above family mayhem. The solitude feels precious, the quiet hard-earned. During these intervals you can breathe, contemplate, and remember you're more than your responsibilities combined. Family will eventually remember you, perhaps not for sacrifices, but for how you maintained stability. You'll become the subject of half-recalled stories, the explanation for surviving recipes and customs that outlast your memory. If fortunate, some future relative will discover your correspondence, recognise your hidden humour, and wonder why family never valued your insights more highly. Ultimately, you're both assistant and spectre, participating in every moment, yet curiously ignored, indispensable but unacknowledged. While you might never take centre stage, you've influenced the narrative more than anyone realises, quietly, patiently, with more dignity than any text message reaction could express. So tonight, as you settle beneath comfortable blankets with electric fan humming, protected from nosy aunts, matchmaking neighbours, and existential threat of surprise engagement announcements, perhaps consider the Victorian single women who preceded you. Their days contained small honours and subtle rebellions, a hidden library volume, a perfectly timed walk, a masterfully executed tea party smile. They endured constant unsolicited opinions, survived being family's permanent addition, and somehow navigated evenings as both chaperone and emotional support person for everyone else's romances. They balanced societal demands with determined independence, armed with nothing except sturdy footwear and history's most passive-aggressive needlework. Sure, maybe they faced gossip, sympathy, or neglect, but they discovered their own version of freedom, brief moments of happiness among china and lace, quiet strength facing endless judgment. They didn't conquer everything, but they certainly made life more fascinating. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, appreciate the privilege of choice, hot running water, freedom to read anything, and that nobody currently judges your value by your sewing skills. Let yourself sink into slumber, knowing that while history often disappointed, people have always found small ways to be determined, hopeful, and quietly courageous. May your dreams be free from restrictive collars and family duties. Sleep well.